Hello, Internet. I am Pastor Recoil, and welcome to my parish. Today is the second Sunday after Epiphany, and we're going to talk about it. Welcome to Pastor Recoil's Parish, where I talk about some things in the Bible that you may not have heard about in church, either because it's not quite appropriate for all audiences, or it just isn't something that's easy to talk about in a sermon. This week's and maybe next week's videos are going to be a little bit different from usual, as I've moved across the country, and we're still getting settled in at our new place. So please be patient during this transition, and I'll try to get things back to normal as quickly as possible. Today's readings for the second Sunday after Epiphany are Isaiah 62, 1 through 5, Psalm 128, 1 Corinthians 12, 1 through 11, and John 2, 1 through 11. Now, we did celebrate Epiphany last Sunday, but Sunday was technically the first Sunday after Epiphany, which many churches celebrate as the feast of the baptism of our Lord. So if you're wondering why we went straight from Epiphany Sunday to the second Sunday after Epiphany, that's why. Now today's readings are all about the sorts of signs that God gives to God's people to show who God is and show God's love and care for God's people. Isaiah 62 gives signs for a people who are hopeless, a people taken from their homeland into exile in a foreign land, having to serve the same people who conquered them, destroyed their way of life, and even destroyed the central building to their worshiping God, the temple. The people of Israel, or more specifically, the people of the kingdom of Judah, were carried off by the Babylonians while they were doing their Babylonian Empire thing. So God gives these people through Isaiah signs of what to look for in their hopelessness to give them some hope. That the people who were once called abandoned will be called my delight. The land once called desolate will be called married. Now that sounds a little weird to us, but that's very much in line with things that would have been important to those people groups of that time and in that place. We see something similar in Psalm 128, also showing signs of hope, though again they're very dated for us today. The one who honors the name will have things go well, and they will be blessed. They'll have fertile wives and lots of children. I told you it was a little bit dated. Even though the examples very much reflect the culture they came from, we can still take from that there are signs that show that someone is following God. Nowadays, I'd say it's less about the ones that are listed in Psalm 128 and more about living lives that reflect a love of God and neighbor. But that's also my Christian bias, which focuses on Jesus and the way Jesus interprets the Hebrew scriptures that's coming out. Now, the next reading comes from 1 Corinthians 12, which talks about spiritual gifts. Now, this is a bit of a loaded issue in modern Christendom. Many strands of Christianity either seem to take spiritual gifts way too seriously, or they ignore them altogether. But the whole point of these spiritual gifts, which Paul lists out as words of wisdom, words of knowledge, faith, healing, miracles, prophecy, telling spirits apart, different languages, and interpreting different languages. The whole point is not to make the person with the gift look good, but is a reminder of who God is and what God is up to. Later in 1 Corinthians, in chapter 14, Paul says that when you meet together, each one has a psalm, a teaching, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. All these things must be done to build up the church. That's the whole point of these spiritual gifts, which are signs to us of who God is. And then we get to the gospel text where Jesus does what really is an incredibly minor miracle. Of all the things Jesus does, healing the sick, raising the dead, this first one recorded in John's gospel is just turning water into something else. I mean, that's not that big of a deal. Give me a few minutes in the grocery store and I'll turn water into Kool-Aid, no problem. But this is the first miracle that John's gospel records Jesus doing. Or, to more correctly use the language that John's gospel uses, the first sign that Jesus does. Like the signs in Isaiah 62 and Psalm 128, like the spiritual gifts in 1 Corinthians 12, Jesus does this sign and others to show who he is and who God is. When Jesus does this and other signs, it shows people that he's something special. For the author of John's gospel, it's showing that Jesus is the word that God speaks made flesh, living among humans for a time, and the signs are evidence that John uses to emphasize that point. And I think it's pretty cool that the first one is actually kind of minor. It reminds us that while we often look for big signs and huge miracles to see God working in the world, God also works in smaller, less important ways every day. Now, I'd even argue that the smaller ways are more important than the big ones. Because I think about the signs that show that I'm a follower of Jesus. What things show my faith in God? What things show a life that reflects that I love God and I love other people? I would rather live out 1,000 small signs that build up over time than one big sign like miraculously healing someone. I'd rather have as my sign a consistent life of kindness and care for others rather than proclaiming some prophecy of the future or bringing some supernatural wisdom. And I think that's what a life following God is supposed to be about. Those countless small signs that show who we are, who God is, and what God is all about. And that all really comes down to love. So if you want to see more content like this, check out the links to my right, or click on the logo just below my face to subscribe so you'll know when my next video comes out. Thank you for watching, and take the time this week to love your neighbor as yourself, especially if you don't like them all that much.